Since 2020, Activision has primarily focused on its Golden Geese gaming series, that being Call of Duty and nothing else. Okay, that's not true. They did release 2 Crash Bandicoot games developed by Toys for Bob, and in 2020 they revived the Tony Hawk skateboarding series for a remake of the first 2 entries developed by Vicarious Visions, before it was absorbed into Blizzard. Oh, and Toys for Bob became a Call of Duty support studio before it went independent last year. But recently, Activision announced another non-Call of Duty game. This one is a follow-up to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4. Now, I tried out Pro Skater 1 and 2 a while back and found it to be a solid, well-designed and overall fun game, although I wouldn't call it one of the best I've ever tried, and I'll definitely have a go on Pro Skater 3 and 4 when it arrives on Game Pass on July the 11th. But I have a question to raise and a video essay to stretch out past 10 minutes. Is there a market for video games that are remakes or remasters? Before we begin, let's get some terminology stuffed down your throat so you can follow along. Remake, re-release, remaster. A remake is when a game is built from scratch using modern technology and assets and often a new game engine. Sometimes aspects from the original game can be altered or changed completely. For example, the 2023 release of Dead Space is a remake of the 2008 original. It's running on a new game engine, with the character models and environments being redesigned for 9th generation consoles and modern PCs. And some changes have also been made, such as having the protagonist, Isaac Clarke, speak, something he didn't do in the original game. A remaster is when a game is re-released with updated assets and visuals for newer consoles, but it still looks visually the same as it did when it first came out, and it plays the same too. Case in point, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit Remastered, which launched in 2020. A re-release is when a game is just released on newer consoles, with the only thing changed being compatibility requirements. Grand Theft Auto 5 is a good enough example of that. We're not going to touch on this particular section in the rest of the video, I just thought it was something worth explaining for clarity's sake. Now, video game remakes and re-releases have been occurring for longer than you might think. Atari in the 1990s started releasing older entries under a 2000 banner, such as Tempest and Defender. Nintendo also remade 4 Super Mario games for the SNES in 1993. So it's not like this practice isn't a new strategy by publishers to try and wring more money from their sweaty handkerchiefs in the hope of the executive needing $300 million by next fall to cover his ex-wife's divorce settlement. But I do find it interesting that the number of remasters and remakes has gone up in recent years. Need for Speed, Resident Evil, Tony Hawk, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Call of Duty, Halo, Gears of War, Command & Conquer, Age of Mythology, Batman Arkham, Warcraft, Tomb Raider, the list goes on. Thankfully, there's one on Wikipedia you can check out if you're interested. Now, not all remakes and remasters have done well. Warcraft 3 was a disastrously buggy mess that somehow had around 5,000 people working on it, although I don't know why. The Halo Master Chief Collection, which came out in 2014, was also broken and stayed that way for a few years. And as for the Batman Arkham trilogy on Nintendo Switch, that came out 2 months before Suicide Squad killed the Justice League. Not a great way to honour that series' legacy. But for every failure, there have been successes. The Dead Space remake I mentioned a short while ago received very positive reviews and sold quite well, although the studio behind it, Motive, is now working primarily on another EA series, that being Battlefield. Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered, which came out in 2016, was also praised for its updates and modifications. Considering that original developer Infinity Ward was supervising the project, you can imagine there was pressure on developer Raven Software to do a good job with the remaster. Sadly, Activision interfered in the final product and inserted microtransactions for no good reason, and it wasn't available as a standalone release until 7 months after launch. But at least they were hands-off when it came to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, and that game received generally good feedback all around. So, where is all of this going? Well, dear viewer, let me ask you this. Should a game be remade or remastered in the first place, and what are the reasons for and against it? In an era where the AAA gaming sphere is dominated by live service cash grabs with little thought and care and attention put into them, more and more players are going back to older games. However, some of their favourite titles may not be compatible with modern consoles, So the idea of remastering or remaking a game to work on newer software not only allows older players to continue enjoying their favourite games, it also potentially expands the audience that might take interest and purchase the game to play on their PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, or whatever console they enjoy the most. For example, the PlayStation 3 has a unique internal system which often made for trickier development, as an ex-developer on Red Dead Redemption admitted a few years ago. If a game was exclusive to PS3, trying to port it over to another console could be difficult. Therefore, if the game was remade or remastered to work on multiple software systems, it would allow more players to try it out on their preferred choice of console. So the idea of remaking or remastering a game for newer consoles, thus expanding the accessibility for audiences, is a strong argument for such a move in the first place. Another reason is that some older games may have had to cut content from the final release due to time or technological constraints. A remake or a remaster, however, released on newer consoles with more storage space, could potentially add that back in and expand on the original experience. In some cases, as with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, new features are brought in altogether, such as a larger soundtrack list and more complex controls that would be seen in later entries. However, there are some arguments that can be made against remasters and remakes, and it would be wrong of me not to bring those up. The first argument is, doesn't remaking or remastering a game erase the original from experience? Yes, the Crash Bandicoot trilogy released in 2017 may have better graphics and revised audio, but what makes a game good is how nostalgic it resonates with audiences. It was developed by different people, under a different studio, at a different time. Remakes and remasters can be seen as a mechanical corporate gateway to try and emulate that same feeling, even if it may no longer be present. Games such as the original Crash Bandicoot and Tony Hawk entries were made for older consoles, and comparing the fidelity and controls of a PS1 to a PS5 is an unfair contest. Of course they're not going to deliver similar results. The older console is objectively worse. So if changing aspects of a game to accommodate for modern hardware is necessary for a better experience, why not just leave the original alone and make a new entry that is capable of delivering the results you want first time? Isn't that innovating? Secondly, do we need remakes and remasters of every single game out there? Need for Speed Hot Pursuit Remastered is a good game, I'll admit, but it cost £35 at launch and didn't look visually that different to the original counterpart. So why was it remastered in the first place? Wouldn't it have been better to try and make the original backwards compatible, preserving the core gameplay and style? Hot Pursuit Remastered came out 10 years after the original, which, whilst not the longest gap ever, does raise the question as to whether a remaster was necessary. Mind you, The Last of Us received a PS4 remaster and a remake for PS5 and PC within that same time span. Even mainstream journalists question the necessity of a remake under those circumstances. Considering that Sony now mandates all PS4 games to be PS5 compatible, would it not have been more effective for Sony to offer The Last of Us Remastered players a free upgrade for PS5 rather than remaking the whole game? Well, at least they didn't do that with a sequel. That would have been... Oh, shit. Yeah, Sony really has a bit of a reputation for charging PS4 players money to upgrade to PS5 versions of their favourite games. Now, I don't have an issue with giving players the option to upgrade in the first place, but when Cyberpunk 2077, a game which had a bit of a messy launch, gave Xbox One and PS4 owners the option to upgrade to PS5 Xbox Series versions for no extra cost, it really doesn't paint Sony in a good light. So, first we buy your game for PS4, Sony, then you charge us more money to upgrade it to PS5 spec, even though the new content added should have been free DLC. If we gave you a third receipt, would you allow us to throw custard pies at the head of PlayStation Studios and call him names? Because that would have been way more amusing. Keep all this in mind, dear viewers, because shit like this is really getting out of hand. When you demand audiences hand over their well-earned cash to replace a perfectly good item with something that looks the same, the only difference being it isn't as dusty around the edges, that's not a service. Rather, it is a shining example of how economics as a concept is becoming less consumer-friendly. When I pay money for a game, I preferably want the complete package. The only time paid DLC is acceptable is if the new content is a significant addition to the game's core structure and world that builds upon the base game, and even then, it shouldn't be too expensive. What the hell was I talking about? Oh yes, I remember now. A third reason that can be made against remasters and remakes is that it can often take time away from a developer which might be better spent working on a new game. Vicarious Visions, in their last few years under Activision, worked on 3 remakes before their absorption into Blizzard. Some would argue that they should have been working on other titles. I mean, they were, just not the ones you might be expecting. There are a few game companies out there which are dedicated to remasters / remakes / ports of older games. PlayStation owns Nixxes Software, which does PC ports of PS4 / PS5 releases, and Bluepoint Games, which mainly works on remasters such as Uncharted: The Nathan Drake Collection. Capcom also does remakes of some of their older entries too, but companies like those are far and few between. So, where do I stand on this matter? I think remakes and remasters aren't an inherently bad idea, but I do think a game should fulfill certain criteria for it to be worthy of said treatment. Point 1. Will the remake / remaster allow it to be playable on more consoles? 2. Is the game in question more than 10 years old? 3. Is the game unable to be re-released on newer systems due to technical constraints? 4. Will the changes made to the game ensure the original's vision remains untouched? 5. Are the changes significant enough to justify updating the original and not just graphical enhancements that could be available as a separate upgrade for owners of newer consoles? 6. Will the original game remain available for sale for those who wish to play it on older consoles, even if they may have to purchase a physical copy from a secondhand store such as CEX? If at least 5 of those criteria are met, then I reckon it should be an acceptable choice of game. Oh, and one last thing. This isn't a mandate, but rather a suggestion. Allow players the option to have certain features enabled during gameplay which match that of the original release. For example, the 2011 release of Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, developed by 343 Industries and Saber Interactive, allowed players to have the graphics match that of the 2001 original, or the remastered version, with just a simple toggle. Likewise, Pro Skater 1 and 2 allowed players the option to change the skateboarding controls to only include maneuvers that were available in the original. That way, you can allow players to decide whether they want to experience something closer to the original or not. So that's my pitch. Any takers? You lot are all hopeless.